When I think back to things that have shaped my life, many of them have been, if not most of them, have been in the mountains. And one place in particular is Alaska. Every great hunt has an origin to it, has a beginning to it. I remember this hunt started really on a rainy day in late May in a truck stop diner in Bonners Ferry, Idaho. My friend and I were sitting there and we were having coffee and some lunch together, and he started asking me what I thought about going to Alaska. He said, "I've heard people say that they wish they could have done it, they should have done it when they were younger," and he said, "We're young, we should do it." And that was the beginning of the hunt. The idea was planted that we were going to go and we were going to experience Alaska. We were going to go and hunt moose in Alaska. We had no idea what we were doing. We had no idea really what we were getting into. We'd both killed a lot of stuff. We'd both hunted a lot of years combined. But there's something about Alaska that's totally different. It's over the top. It's on a whole nother level. If you can imagine wilderness where hardly anybody has ever stepped, and then you're dropped off in the middle of it with no communication, nothing. And so here we begin to do our research, and we'd heard of this great spot up there, and so we decided we're going to give it a whirl. And before you know it, September had rolled around, and there we are in the mountains of Alaska, and dropped off in the middle of nowhere on a lake with nothing but a tent. But we were dropped off in the middle of nowhere, and because of weight restrictions, we only had 75 pounds of gear each. We had no idea how much we needed for food, anything. Truly, we were just naive on a lot of levels. Part of the process in Alaska is that your transportation, your main way of moving around out there is planes. And the weather messes with you, and you know, it's a dangerous thing. In fact, a couple of the pilots that we flew with, this was only 8 years ago, have since then wrecked, and they're no longer with us. And so that's just a reality of the moose hunting world. The hunting in Alaska, there's danger that comes along with it. I think anytime that you're out in inexpressible beauty like that, and just isolation and wilderness, you're really at its mercy. And there's a reason why it's desolate out there. There's a reason why it's wilderness. That's because it's hard to access. And so that makes these hunts really incredible, because what you're doing is you're accessing some of the most incredible country on the planet that God has created. And He's made it in a way, God created it in a way that it's not accessible. He created it in a way that very few people would ever get to enjoy its beauty. And so when we talk about hunting in Alaska, we're talking about a place that very few men have ever walked, and beauty that very few people have ever laid their eyes on. And that's what really makes a hunt in Alaska so special. It tests you, it pushes you, and this hunt didn't disappoint. We went in for a 2-week hunt with about a week worth of food, and we began to hunt, and we got after it quickly. On the first day, my friend killed his bull, and we packed him for a couple of days, and then I began to hunt, and it was one adventure after another. The salmon were running, the grayling we were catching, pulling rafts up through these beautiful willow bottoms, and just pursuing moose, glassing from rocky ridge tops, and you just see the huckleberry brush that's turned red all around, and you see caribou in the distance, and you see black bears, and you see grizzly bears, and it's just phenomenal. And one night we're sitting there on the beach, and the wolves start howling. They start howling, and they're all around us, and we can hear them walking down the rocks in the beach, and it's just getting light, and the fog is set in so thick that we couldn't see them. We pop out of the tent, and we can hear them walking on the rocks, but we couldn't see them to get a shot. And this hunt, you know, at a young age, was something that changed me. There's something about Alaska that changes you fundamentally once you've experienced it. It changes you from the inside. I don't know if I can explain it well enough, but it plants a seed in your soul that begins to grow, and you desire to be there. Your heart somehow is planted in Alaska. And so around day 5 or 6 of our hunt, I spotted this bull. And he was on the far side. We had passed up several bulls. They weren't big enough. And we were just enjoying the process. We'd called a couple in, and it was like a utopia for us. We were absolutely stunned by the beauty and the wildlife. It's like wild kingdom there. And we closed in, and we had to cross this huge draw a couple of miles across and pull the boat up a river. And we get in place, and there's 2 bulls there, surprisingly. We didn't know that at the time. But a smaller bull runs off, and then all of a sudden the big one appears. And it's in that moment that everything starts to become surreal. Everything changes, and the focus comes in. And he was about 300 yards, and he's quartering away. And so I got settled behind the gun, and I touched one off, and he just disappears in the alder. And then is when you're just wondering, did I do it all right? You know, we couldn't tell from the video if he was down. I thought he was. I heard a whop. And so we begin to climb up there on the tangled alders, and we make our way all the way up. And there he is.
We just found Justin's bull. We haven't looked at it yet.
And as a young man, and now
here he is.
Still as a young man, but looking back 8 years.
He's got really nice saddles.
That was a moment that changed me. It was a moment where all the work, all the dreams, all the time it took just to flat out be able to experience this, all came together, and you sit there just kind of in an awe, and you're just stunned at what has just happened, and the blessing of God in your life to give you the physical ability to do it, to give you the financial ability to get up there, to give you the time to be able to do it, and the location to be able to harvest an animal like this. You look at the creation that God has made, and you see an animal that is so majestic that all you can do is praise God for it, because we know that His creation is a reflection of Him, and we see these things that are just stunning, and we know that they come from a stunning Creator, and that's just an amazing, amazing thing. We prepped this moose out, and we just enjoyed the moment. You know, you look around, you see the lake, you see the rocky mountains that are carved out, the beautiful colors in the fall in Alaska, and you sit there and you soak it in, because you know that these moments don't come around very often. You know that some of these moments are once in a lifetime. Some of these moments people will never experience. And so there's a sense of gratitude when you're standing over an animal like this. There's a humbling that happens, and just an awe and almost a reverence, honestly, just for the blessings that God pours out in your life. Really, the animal is a very small portion of the experience. There's so much else that goes into these hunts, and what took this hunt over the top wasn't the moose, it was everything else that came along with it. We had a sat phone with us, and at a certain point, I don't know what was wrong with the batteries, but we had a defective battery, and our batteries were dead for the sat phone. So we found ourselves 130 miles, 130 river miles from town, with a downed moose in 70-degree weather. I've hunted in Alaska a lot of times. I've never seen weather like this. It was 65 to 70 degrees every single day, and blue skies. And so we found ourselves in a dilemma. We found ourselves 130 miles from town with a 1,000-pound moose in hot weather and no way to communicate with our pilot. So we decided that we were going to go for it. We'd heard a lot about this river that we were going to be floating. We knew it was a dangerous river, It had some serious rapids on it, log jams, but we knew also that if we were gonna keep this meat good, if we were gonna make this a successful hunt, which is what it's all about, then we had to get this thing out. And so we loaded all of our gear into the raft and we began to go down the river. And I'm not joking you, we come out of in the first bend of the river, our raft is moving down this swift water and we're running right into the trees, and I stick my foot out to stop us and my foot gets hooked in like a crook in a branch, and it just drags me right out of the raft and splash right into the water. And I jump up and I'm so mad, and my friend Travis is just laughing his butt off at my plight in the water, and I just get mad and I lose it, and I start yelling at him as he's floating down the river, and I slip and go completely under the water again. And it took us 5 days of floating down this river before we reached our destination, but it was in those 5 days that I feel that this hunt was set apart from every other hunt. As we floated down, I'd mentioned before, we were out of food. We only had a week's worth of food, and my moose was super tough, but we did have the moose, but we didn't have anything else. So we were surviving on moose, and we were catching salmon and eating salmon for dinner. We were completely out of all of our other food, and that's what we had to live on, was moose meat and salmon for 5 days. And so we began to move our way down this river, and we encountered some incredible things. We encountered this place where it was white water like you can't even imagine. We're going down, and we're just, we've got 1,000 pounds of moose meat. We have all of our gear, and we have us in this NRS raft, and we're pounding down through the rapids, and we're holding on, and then we'd get into a log jam, and the logs would be coming over the top of the boat, and then the boat would get jammed up into the logs, and we'd be slammed through them. I remember there was this big sweeper hanging out over the river, and we couldn't stop, and we had to hit it. And we got down in the bottom of the boat, and the boat's just pounding up into the sweeper, and the horns are getting hooked on everything, and we finally get spit out the other side. And day after day, it was adventure like this. But on day three, I was behind the oars, and we're floating down through this beautiful spot, and it was just tranquil and peaceful, and the sunlight was flittering through the aspens, and the water where we were was just swift moving, and it wasn't too deep where we were, and we're going along, and I'm just slowly paddling, and there was a little snag hanging out over the river, and I ducked underneath it. We'd been under huge snags. I ducked underneath it, and the horns got hooked on this little rotten snag and broke the rope that they were tied in the boat with, and the moose head just plops right out of the boat into the river. Gone. And my friend and I just look at each other with this look of just confusion and horror and dread and not knowing what to do, and I turn around and I look up the river, and I could see the moose doing kind of somersaults coming down the river. A paddle would come out of the water, and then it would disappear. It would come out of the water and disappear. So Travis runs to the front of the boat, and he grabs some brush that's on the side of the river, and he's holding on to it. And so my end of the boat swings down river, and he's holding on to it, and all of a sudden the branch that he's holding breaks. And so I grab a branch, and the boat swings around again, and we're facing downriver, and it breaks. And then, so my friend Travis grabs the branch, and he's holding on to it, and he's got us anchored now, but I'm facing down the river, and I look up the river, and I see the moose paddles just tumbling down the river, and I'm wondering what I should do, and I look up there, and here it comes, and then it just falls into a deep hole and disappears. It's gone. You know, where he'd been tumbling was maybe 3 feet deep, but all of a sudden the water got really deep right there, maybe 10 feet or so. And this moose just falls into the deep hole and it disappears, and I'm looking down in the water, and I can see down in the water, I see these white paddles just spinning in circles down in the sandy bottom in this hole. And so I run, and I'll never forget, there's fishing poles laid over the top of the deck and backpacks and moose meat, and I just kind of ran and jumped off of them over Travis's head into the water and dove in. I had hip waders on, full Gore-Tex bibs, and I grabbed onto the moose, and the water was so cold. You got to remember, this stuff is fed by glaciers, and I dive under the water and I grab onto the moose, and there was two things I did not calculate for. First off, the moose is like a sheet of plywood under the water, and I grab it and I could feel the sand on the bottom of the ground. I grab it and I could feel the sand on the bottom of my feet, and I go to push off, and when I turned the paddles into the water, it just bowled me over. And I'll never forget the feeling of my back hitting the silt. And then I rolled over the top of the horns, and I tried to push off again, and the horns rolled over me again, and I wasn't able to hold on to it, so I had to let go of it, and I pushed myself up to the top. And when I come out of the water, I'm just struggling to stay on top of the water, and Travis's eyes were like this big, and he reaches his hand out to grab me and pulls me in the boat right as we go up on a log jam. And now the boat is sitting up on a log jam with water pounding into the back of it and a sharp stop sticking through the bottom. And it was just a mess. I'd lost my moose. And you got to remember, to swim with a moose head that's 30, 40, 50 pounds is a feat. And I just wasn't able to do it. And so I lost the moose in the river, and we got to shore and we couldn't see him anywhere. We had no idea what to do. In Alaska, the unit that we were in, the moose had to be 50 inches or 4 brow tines, and you have to come out with the horns. And so we knew that we had to find this thing, but this river was big, and the video doesn't really do it justice. The river was a lot bigger than it looks there, and a lot more difficult to navigate. And so we decided we'd pull the raft back upstream and float over it. And we float over this hole, and I don't know how it happened, but the water was probably 10 to 12 feet deep right there. And there was an old willow snag in the water, and somehow this moose had bounced up to the top of it and was only about a foot underwater with its brow tines locked in the willow.
Which is right here.
Ended up diving in the river after it. Luckily Trav saved me, but I couldn't grab the moose. We found him here piled up into a stick. We're gonna go in after him.
He is right there, kind of that white spot underwater is the skull. Horns are upside down. We're gonna have to float right over top of him and grab him. And so we were able to float over it again and retrieve it. What do you say now? Is that ever gonna happen again? Man, no. Are you gonna tie him in better next time?
Yeah. Got him back.
We got him back. He's a little wet. Oh. We had to unload all our quarters. It's a story that I'll never forget. I've probably told this story 50 or 100 times to people, and it's a story that I'll tell my children and my grandchildren. It's more than just about the antlers to me. This was a special trip with a good friend of mine, and I wouldn't trade these memories for anything. You know, the hunt had a beginning, and that was in a diner. It had a middle, and that was, you know, our journey up there, the hunt itself. But really, a hunt doesn't have an end, because the memories stay with you. The stories keep getting told over and over again. Every time I look at these antlers, the memories flood back. And I think that's what draws me back to hunting over and over again, is hunting has a beginning, but it doesn't have an end. It doesn't have an end. And I think there's something about that draws us as people. As people, God created us with a beginning, but no end. Every one of us is eternal. Every one of us is eternal. The question is, where are we going to spend eternity? Where are we going to spend eternity? We're either going to spend eternity in heaven with Jesus, or we're going to spend eternity separated from Him. But one way or the other, we all have a beginning, and every hunt has a beginning, but there is no end to it. And we live with the decisions that we've made, the choices that we've made, the risks that we've taken, the gambles we've made. This moose hunt was a gamble. We took some big risks, and I live with those every day. I live with the memory of them every day. And
when we talk about Jesus, we're going to live with the decision that we've made about Him every day for eternity. And when I look at this moose, we made the right decisions. We had a great journey. When I look at my life with Jesus, and I look forward into eternity, I know I've made the right decision about Him too. I challenge you to make your decision today about Jesus. I think back to what those men said. They said one day, someday, I hope, I wish we could go to Alaska. And none of them that I'm thinking about have still pulled the trigger. They still haven't pulled the trigger. And because they haven't made that decision, because they haven't begun that journey, they'll never experience anything like this. And maybe that's you today with hunting, or more importantly, maybe that's you today with Jesus. And you say, one day, someday, when I settle down, when I get this out of my system. And I would just challenge you, today is the day. We're only guaranteed this moment that we're breathing, that we're thinking. Make a choice today. And enjoy it forever. I just want to take a moment and thank you again for faithfully watching our videos. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to our channel so you can stay up to date with everything coming out. Also, if you want to access exclusive hunts, exclusive content, and stay up to date with everything going on with Limitless Outdoors, go over to patreon.com/limitlessoutdoors and you can follow us there. Again, that's patreon.com/limitlessoutdoors, and you can follow us there and access incredible footage that we're not putting anywhere else. So hope you all have a wonderful day, and God bless you all.